Elias and Sarah, a couple from Brooklyn, moved to a fixer-upper in the Catskills to escape the city noise. The horror isn't a ghost with a bloody face, it's a series of real anomalies. A hum in the walls that causes migraines, a crawl space that seems deeper than the house's footprint, and the slow realization that the previous owner didn't leave, he just moved inward. The silence in Delaware County wasn't actually silent. That was the first thing Elias noticed. It was a heavy, pressurized stillness that pushed against his eardrums, the kind you feel right before a massive thunderstorm. "It's just the lack of sirens," Sarah said, unboxing a set of ceramic plates in their new kitchen. The sunlight hit the floorboards in long, dusty rectangles. "Your brain is literally detoxing from Atlantic Avenue." Elias nodded, wanting to believe her. He was a freelance sound editor. His ears were his livelihood. He had spent a decade cleaning up audio tracks, removing the hiss of air conditioners and the distant rumble of subways. He knew what empty sound was supposed to feel like. This wasn't it. By the third night, the hum began. It started at approximately 3:14 a.m. It was a low-frequency vibration, somewhere around 40 hertz. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears so much as a sensation you felt in your soft tissues, your stomach, your throat, the back of your eyes. Elias sat up in bed. The room was freezing. The smart thermostat on the wall showed 68 degrees, but his breath misted in front of his face. He looked at Sarah. She was fast asleep, her breathing rhythmic. He followed the vibration. He walked down the hallway, his bare feet clicking on the cold oak. He reached the door to the basement, a heavy wooden thing they hadn't bothered to paint yet. He pressed his ear to the wood. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It sounded like a heart, a massive, slow-moving heart beating inside a chest of concrete and dirt. He opened the door. The air that rushed up was metallic, smelling of old copper and wet fur. He turned on the light. The basement was empty, just their moving boxes and the old furnace. But as he stepped onto the bottom stair, he saw it. A small, perfectly circular hole in the drywall near the ceiling. It looked like it had been bored with a drill, but the edges were jagged, as if something had chewed its way out. And from that hole, a faint, rhythmic scratching began. Elias. He jumped, nearly falling. Sarah was standing at the top of the stairs, her silhouette blurred by the hallway light. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "What?" "The scratching, like something is in the walls. Not a mouse, something bigger." Sarah sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "It's an old house, Elle. Squirrels, raccoons, the foundation's settling. Go to sleep. We have the contractor coming at 8. Elias looked back at the hole. For a split second, he thought he saw a flash of pale, wet skin disappear into the darkness of the vent, but he blinked, and it was gone. Just the shadows of the copper pipes.
The contractor, a man named Miller with skin like cracked leather and eyes that seemed perpetually squinted against the sun, arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. He didn't step inside at first. He stood on the porch, looking at the roofline of the house with a strange clinical detachment. Found the source of that vibration yet? Elias asked, leaning against the doorframe with a mug of black coffee. He hadn't slept since the basement incident. Miller spit a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Old houses don't just vibrate, son. They breathe. But this model, the Blackwood build, they were built with double cavity walls. For the winters, they said. Keeps the heat in, but it leaves a lot of empty space where things can hide. What kind of things? Sarah asked, joining them. Air, Miller said shortly. Mostly. They went down to the basement. The morning light through the high, narrow windows made the space feel less oppressive than the night before, but the metallic smell remained. Elias pointed out the circular hole near the ceiling. Miller frowned. He climbed a ledger ladder and poked a flashlight into the dark aperture. That's not a drill hole, and it's not a squirrel. He pulled his finger back. A thin, grayish thread was stuck to his glove. It looked like a strand of fiberglass insulation, but it was coiled like a spring. I need to see behind this partition, Miller muttered. He grabbed a crowbar from his belt and wedged it into the seam of the drywall. With a sickening screech of pulling nails, the panel came free. Sarah gasped. Elias felt the coffee in his stomach turn cold. Behind the wall wasn't just the foundation. There was a gap, roughly 4 feet wide, that ran the entire length of the house. It was a house within a house, but it wasn't empty. Tied to the copper pipes were hundreds of pieces of string, nylon, twine, old shoelaces, all crisscrossing in a chaotic web, and hanging from the strings were small, mundane objects: a rusted key, a lock of blonde hair, a digital watch with a cracked face, and a single silver earring that Sarah had lost 2 days ago. "What the hell is this?" Elias whispered, stepping forward. "Don't touch him," Miller warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Look at the floor." In the dust of the crawl space, there were no boot prints. Instead, there were long, dragging marks, as if something without feet, something that moved on its belly or its elbows, had been sliding back and forth between the kitchen floorboards and the basement ceiling. "I'm not doing this job," Miller said suddenly, stepping off the ladder and retreating toward the stairs. "Wait, what? You haven't even given us a quote!" Sarah shouted. Miller didn't look back. "I don't fix what's meant to be sealed. You want my advice? You take a bag of quick dry cement, you fill every hole in this basement, and you move your bed to the center of the room. Don't let your blankets touch the walls."
The heavy basement door slammed shut behind him. Silence returned to the house, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting for them to notice the next hole. Later that night, Elias was sitting in the living room, trying to work on his laptop. The hum was back, but louder now, a rhythmic thrum, 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 thrum. He looked at the wall. The expensive eggshell white paint was vibrating. Then he heard a sound that made his heart stop. It came from the air vent directly above the sofa where Sarah was reading. It was a voice. Not a ghostly moan, but a flat, perfect imitation of his own voice. "Sarah," the voice whispered from the vent, "come into the hallway. I found something." Sarah looked up, smiling. "Did you, Elle? I'm coming." Elias sat frozen. He was sitting 5 feet away from her. He hadn't said a word. "Sarah, don't move," Elias whispered, his real voice trembling. Sarah froze, her foot halfway to the floor. She looked at Elias, then slowly looked up at the dark slats of the air vent. From inside the wall, the other Elias laughed. It wasn't a human laugh. It was the sound of air being squeezed through a wet pipe. The air in the living room felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. Sarah's face drained of color, her eyes darting between Elias and the dark metal slats of the vent. "Elias?" she breathed, her voice barely a thread. You didn't just say that?" "I'm right here," Elias said, slowly standing up. He didn't take his eyes off the vent. "I'm right here, Sarah. Stay away from the walls." The scratching resumed, but this time it was aggressive. It sounded like fingernails or something harder like bone dragging against the back of the drywall, moving upward. It traveled from the living room through the ceiling and toward the narrow staircase that led to the unfinished attic. "We're leaving," Elias said, grabbing Sarah's hand. His palm was slick with sweat. "Right now, grab the keys." They bolted for the front door. Elias grabbed the handle and twisted. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, the muscles in his forearm tensing. The deadbolt was retracted. The door should have swung open, but it felt as though it had been welded to the frame. "The windows!" Sarah screamed. Elias grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the entry table and hurled it at the window next to the door. The glass didn't shatter. The lamp bounced off with a dull thud, as if the glass had been backed by solid concrete. Through the pane, the trees outside looked distorted, wavy, like a heat mirage. The trees weren't swaying in the wind. They were static, a perfect, unmoving photograph of a forest. "It's not the door," Elias whispered, a horrific realization dawning on him. "It's the house. It's closing." Suddenly, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Clack, clack, clack.
The sound came from the ceiling, a rhythmic tapping. Elias looked up and saw the pull-down string for the attic stairs swaying gently. Small, dark droplets began to leak through the rectangular seam of the attic door. It wasn't blood. It was thick, black oil, the kind used to lubricate heavy machinery. "The electrical outlets," Sarah pointed, her voice shaking. Elias looked. In every outlet along the baseboards, the small plastic faces seemed to be melting, but they weren't melting from heat. Small, pale, fleshy tubes were poking out of the holes where the plug should go. They looked like tiny, eyeless worms twisting in the air, sensing for vibrations. "They're microphones," Elias realized, his sound editor brain kicking into gear. "It's been listening to us, every word, every breath. That's how it got my voice." The attic door creaked open an inch. A gust of that metallic copper smell hit them, now mixed with something sweet and rotting. "We can't stay down here," Elias said, looking at the worms emerging from the walls. "If the house is sealed, the only way out is through the source. We have to see what's in the attic." "Are you insane?" Sarah hissed. "The contractor said this was a Blackwood build," Elias said, his voice low. "I remember reading about Blackwood in an old architectural forum. He didn't build houses for people. He built vessels. There's always a release valve, usually in the highest point." They climbed the stairs, Elias leading with a heavy kitchen knife in one hand and his phone's flashlight in the other. The attic was a labyrinth of insulation and exposed beams, but the pink fiberglass had been moved. It had been woven into large cocoon-like structures that hung from the rafters. Elias shined his light on the nearest cocoon. Inside wasn't a person, but a collection of parts. Dozens of old telephones, radio tubes, copper wiring, and human teeth, all fused together by that black, oily substance. At the far end of the attic, sitting in a rocking chair that shouldn't have been there, was a figure. It wore a suit, a dusty tweed three-piece suit from the 1950s. But the man inside the suit was nothing more than a skeleton of wire and bone. Its head was a massive vintage studio microphone, the silver mesh glinting in the flashlight beam. The thing's mouth moved, the mesh vibrating. "Sarah," it said, using Elias's voice again. But then it shifted. It spoke in Sarah's voice. "Elias, help me. It's so dark in the walls."
Then it shifted a third time. It spoke in a voice they didn't recognize, the voice of Miller, the contractor. "I told you, don't let the blankets touch the walls." The figure began to stand up, its wire limbs clicking and snapping like a giant insect.
The contractor, a man named Miller with skin like cracked leather and eyes that seemed perpetually squinted against the sun, arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. He didn't step inside at first. He stood on the porch, looking at the roofline of the house with a strange, clinical detachment. "Found the source of that vibration yet?" Elias asked, leaning against the door frame with a mug of black coffee. He hadn't slept since the basement incident. Miller spit a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Old houses don't just vibrate, son. They breathe. But this model, the Blackwood build, they were built with double-cavity walls. For the winters, they said. Keeps the heat in. But it leaves a lot of empty space where things can hide." "What kind of things?" Sarah asked, joining them. "Air," Miller said, shortly. "Mostly." They went down to the basement. The morning light through the high, narrow windows made the space feel less oppressive than the night before, but the metallic smell remained. Elias pointed out the circular hole near the ceiling. Miller frowned. He climbed a ladder and poked a flashlight into the dark aperture. "That's not a drill hole, and it's not a squirrel." He pulled his finger back. A thin, grayish thread was stuck to his glove. It looked like a strand of fiberglass insulation, but it was coiled like a spring. "I need to see behind this partition," Miller muttered. He grabbed a crowbar from his belt and wedged it into the seam of the drywall. With a sickening screech of pulling nails, the panel came free. Sarah gasped. Elias felt the coffee in his stomach turn cold. Behind the wall wasn't just the foundation. There was a gap, roughly 4 feet wide, that ran the entire length of the house. It was a house within a house, but it wasn't empty. Tied to the copper pipes were hundreds of pieces of string. Nylon, twine, old shoelaces, all crisscrossing in a chaotic web. And hanging from the strings were small, mundane objects: a rusted key, a lock of blonde hair, a digital watch with a cracked face, and a single silver earring that Sarah had lost 2 days ago. "What the hell is this?" Elias whispered, stepping forward. "Don't touch him," Miller warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Look at the floor." In the dust of the crawl space, there were no boot prints. Instead, there were long, dragging marks, as if something without feet, something that moved on its belly or its elbows, had been sliding back and forth between the kitchen floorboards and the basement ceiling. "I'm not doing this job," Miller said, suddenly, stepping off the ladder and retreating toward the stairs. "Wait, what? You haven't even given us a quote!" Sarah shouted. Miller didn't look back. "I don't fix what's meant to be sealed. You want my advice? You take a bag of quick dry cement, you fill every hole in this basement, and you move your bed to the center of the room. Don't let your blankets touch the walls." The thing in the tweed suit didn't move like a living creature. It moved like a stop-motion film, jerky, frame by frame, accompanied by the sound of grinding metal and snapping dry wood. As it rose from the rocking chair, the black oil dripped from its microphone head, sizzling as it hit the attic floorboards. "It's not just a mimic," Elias whispered, pushing Sarah behind him. "It's a recorder. It's been storing every soul that ever lived in this house." The creature's chest cavity, a cage of rusted copper ribs, shuddered. A sound began to emit from it, not a voice this time, but a static-filled recording of a birthday party from 1974. Children laughing, a woman singing happy birthday, the clink of silverware against china. The contrast between the joyous audio and the skeletal horror standing before them was nauseating. "Elias, look at the floor," Sarah whimpered. The black oil wasn't just dripping, it was flowing. It followed the grooves in the wood, forming a perfect geometric pattern, a circuit board etched into the floor of the attic.
The entire house was alive, powered by the vibration Elias had felt since the first night. The Blackwood vessel, Elias muttered, remembering the forum post. Blackwood wasn't an architect, he was a medium. He believed that sound never truly dies, it just loses its frequency. He built these houses to tune the dead back into the physical world. The creature lunged. It didn't run, it simply folded across the room. One moment it was 10 feet away, the next its cold, wire-wrapped fingers were inches from Elias's throat. Elias swung the kitchen knife. The blade sank into the creature's shoulder with a sound like cutting through thick cables. There was no blood, only a burst of white noise so loud it knocked them both to their knees. The creature recoiled, its microphone head spinning wildly. A dozen voices screamed at once, men, women, children, all blending into a singular, agonizing chord. "The Blackwood vessel!" Elias shouted over the noise. "The release valve isn't up here. It's the hole Miller found." They scrambled toward the attic stairs. As they descended, the house began to distort. The hallway was longer than it should have been. The doors were melting into the walls, the wood grain flowing like water. They reached the kitchen, but the floor was gone. In its place was a sea of that pink fiberglass insulation, churning like a living thing. "Jump!" Elias cried. They leapt through the kitchen doorway and tumbled into the basement. The air here was freezing now, the hum so intense that Elias's nose began to bleed. He ran to the partition Miller had opened. The house within a house was glowing with a faint, sickly blue light. The web of strings were vibrating so fast they looked like a solid mist. At the center of the web sat the heart. It was an old-fashioned phonograph, but instead of a brass horn, it had a human rib cage. Instead of a needle, a sharpened finger bone traced the grooves of a record made of translucent, frozen smoke. "Wait," a voice said.
Elias stopped. The voice came from the phonograph. It wasn't a mimicry. It was his mother's voice. His mother, who had died 3 years ago in a hospital in Queens. "Elias, honey, don't break it," the voice pleaded. "If you break the record, I go away forever. Don't you want to hear me again?" Sarah grabbed Elias's arm. "It's a trick, Elias. It's the house. It's using your memories." "It sounds just like her, Sarah," Elias said, his hand trembling as he held the crowbar. "The exact cadence, the way she says my name." The phonograph shifted. The record spun faster. "I'm so cold in here, Elias. It's so quiet. Please, just stay. Just stay in the walls with me." From the ceiling above, the creature in the tweed suit began to descend, its wire limbs threading through the floorboards like needles through fabric. It was coming to reclaim its record. The basement was no longer a room, it was a throat. The walls seemed to pulse in time with the phonograph's spinning disc. Elias stood frozen, the crowbar heavy in his hand. "Elias, please!" the voice of his mother whispered, now accompanied by the faint smell of the lavender detergent she always used. "It's just a vibration, baby. Join the frequency. You can stay here forever. No more city noise, no more bills, just us." The creature from the attic, the mimic, had reached the basement floor. It didn't attack. It stood behind the phonograph, its microphone head tilted, watching Elias with a predatory curiosity. It was the conductor of this mechanical afterlife, and it was waiting for Elias to surrender. "Elias, look at me!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking the spell. "That isn't your mother! It's an echo! It's a parasite feeding on your grief!" The mimic's head snapped toward Sarah. Its mouth opened, and a harsh, grinding sound, like a car crash played in slow motion, erupted from its chest.
It stepped toward her, its wire fingers elongating into jagged needles. "No!" Elias roared. He looked at the phonograph. He saw the finger-bone needle tracing the grooves of the smoke-colored record. He realized then that the black wood vessel didn't just preserve the dead, it trapped them. Every voice he heard was a soul being ground down, played over and over, until there was nothing left but static. "I'm sorry, Mom," Elias whispered. He swung the crowbar. The impact was spectacular. The smoke-colored record didn't break, it detonated. A shockwave of pure sound slammed into Elias, throwing him back against the stone foundation. The basement was suddenly filled with 1,000 voices, not whispers, but screams, the sound of 1,000 records shattering at once. The black oil on the floor ignited into a cold blue flame that didn't burn skin, but seemed to dissolve the shadows. The mimic let out a final distorted wail. Its tweed suit collapsed as the wire skeleton inside snapped and withered, turning into rusted dust before it hit the floor. The house groaned, the foundation shivered, and for a moment Elias felt the floor drop away.
When Elias opened his eyes, the sun was blinding. He was lying on the grass in the front yard. Beside him, Sarah was gasping for air, her clothes stained with the gray dust of the attic. They looked back at the house. It looked normal. The modern farmhouse aesthetic, the white siding, the charming porch, it all looked like a dream from a real estate brochure. But as Elias watched, he noticed the windows. The glass wasn't clear. It was opaque, like cataract-covered eyes. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Elias didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at his voice memos app. There was a new recording, dated today, 3:14 a.m. He pressed play. For the first 10 seconds, there was only the sound of wind, then a low-frequency hum, and then a voice, his own voice, clear and crisp. "We're safe now, Sarah. We never have to leave." Elias looked at Sarah. She was smiling at him, but her smile was too wide. It didn't reach her eyes. "Let's go back inside, Elle," she said. Her voice was perfect. Too perfect. "I think I left something in the basement." Elias looked down at his hands. They were pale, almost translucent. Behind him, he could hear the faint, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the attic string swinging in a wind that didn't exist. They weren't on the lawn. They were still in the walls. The vessel hadn't broken. It had simply updated its playlist. The most terrifying ending in a story is the one where the protagonist realizes that their attempt to escape was an illusion. For American audiences, the loss of autonomy and the cycle of domestic life represent the ultimate psychological trap. And with that, our story comes to an end.